First of all, in the Elder Scrolls universe there are two forces, entities, or powers that created the universe as we know it. Their names vary depending on the culture or race, but in Oblivion and Skyrim they are mostly called Anu and Padme. The latter is sometimes also known as thos, but for simplicity we'll be referring to them just as Padme. From the clash or interaction between these two beings, the universe as we know it is created, and the Et Ada emerge. Humans know them as gods and demons, and elves call them Aedra and Daedra, or ancestors and non-ancestors. All cultures have a pantheon composed of these entities, but in all of these pantheons there's also the reflection of Anu and Padme. There are the archetypes of the dragon god and the lost god, reflecting Anu and Padme respectively. The successor of the dragon is called Akatosh by humans, and Auriel by elves, the dragon of time, whose birth from eternity allows the day. Padme's reflection is known as the lost god, and is closely related to the mortal plane, and it's key to the conflict between humans and elves. The disappearance refers to their absence from the world, or the loss of their divinity, and their name is Shezar for humans, or Lorkhan. The elves speak of Lorkhan as an evil entity that tricked the rest of the Et Ada into his trap, while for humans, Lorkhan is a champion of humanity. Skipping the philosophical talk that comes in the myth of creation, the most consistent version of the events goes something like this. Lorkhan convinced the other Et Ada to help him to create something else, a world, a place where their essence could reflect with themselves. Auriel, or Akatosh, the god form of Anu, was one of the Et Ada who contributed the most to creating the world. Along with 7 other minor or major deities, they became the 8 divines so often mentioned in the games. Since they lost most of their power, they are unable to consciously affect the human world in a significant way, but the remains can still be seen in the sky. These remains are the planets visible from any part of Nirn. This solar system, which contains Nirn, the 8 planets, and the Sun, is known as Mundus, and the world that Lorkhan was trying to create is known as Nirn. The other spirits that remain in Nirn for too long and give a small fraction of their power begin to lose the rest of their divinity. Those who still retained their godhood fled to the stars, tearing holes in the void of space to a higher plane of essence called Aetherium. One of those Et Ada with the most power, Magnus, left a hole so big in the sky that is now the sun of Nirn, from where all magic comes from. Another of these spirits, called Ifri, allowed his body to become the bones of the world, referring to the natural and physical laws that allowed nature to exist. These bones of the world are known in Elven languages as Elnofey, in case you hear one of these terms thrown around in any of the games. Other spirits followed through and became other elements of Nirn. But before the Et Ada could abandon the world, Lorkhan was severely punished. Akatosh called upon his primal essence to create a bow, and along with a spirit close to him, called Trinamak, they trialed Lorkhan and ripped out his heart, putting the organ in the tip of an arrow and shooting it into the sea. What they didn't know was that where the heart would fall, a volcano would rise. That it's very relevant for all the Elder Scrolls, but we will not get into detail with that. But here's the catch. Since Lorkhan was the architect of the world, he couldn't be completely eradicated from reality. He was Mundus. The Et Ada were now inside of Lorkhan in a way, and the remains of his body were thrown in space, turning into the 2 moons that now orbit Nirn. But since Akatosh left more of himself in the creation of this world, he became the god of time. Other Et Ada didn't want to be part of Lorkhan's plans. Perhaps they had selfish ends, or maybe they saw beyond his lies. So they isolated themselves in a plane between Aetherium and Mundus called Oblivion, a sort of magical hell. These are the so-called Daedric princes, which in Elven means known ancestor, as I said. There are about 70 known Daedric princes, and they are seen as antagonic spirits by Elven and human races. Although they are very worshipped by some elves, it all depends on the culture. Most of the quests in Oblivion in which we find a cult or a statue, well, those are related to the Daedric princes, although as part of the main game, we only interact with 2 of them, the Daedric Prince of Change and Destruction and the Daedric Prince of Madness. Now let's just skip quickly into the history of mortals, or the Meretic era. For the sake of simplicity, we'll just go through what's relevant to Oblivion, okay? It is said that North came from magical Iceland, but due to the nature of the world, it froze physically and temporarily, and thus it became Greenland. The elves, or Altmer, because, okay, the common term to refer to elves in the Elder Scrolls series is Mer, so when we say Altmer, we are referring to the High Elves. But then again, for the sake of simplicity, we'll just call them elves, okay? They come from a lost island in the south that they swear for their entire species is the Garden of Eden, and they're also the descendants of the first Ed Ada. The Redguard, or the dark-skinned people, come from an archipelago that was sunken by sonic nuclear magic. They brought that upon themselves, by the way. Some of the forebears we see in the games come from a place called Elsewhere. It is said that a long time ago they were also elves, but they prayed so much to the Daedric prince of Twilight that they were turned into cats. And depending on the lunar phase when they were burned, they will look like domestic cats, catmen, or freaking saber-tooths. And the reptilians come from a dark swampland called Blackmarsh, in which deep in the forest lives a species of tree deities from whose sap they were burned. And it is also stated that their mammary glands secreted this exact same substance, and no, I'm not making this up, this is apparently part of the Elder Scrolls lore. Now, with most of the species now explained, let me go through all the political and history bullshittery about the Merethic era, and let's get just to the part we're actually interested in. The yellow-skinned elves, or Altmer, settled in a place called the Somerset Isles. The most arrogant of them stays there, but other cultures that choose to worship the Daedra or intermingled with inferior races and deities migrated to the central continent called Tamriel. At some point in the First Era, one of these groups of elves, known as the Ayleid, took control of central Tamriel, what is now known as Cyrodiil, and erected the White Gold Tower in the center of a lake. The reason why the Ayleids were so different from the Altmer is because they praised the Daedric princes, in addition to the 8 divines, and they made no distinction between good and evil Daedra. They were a bunch of city-states governed by a mage king, and to make a comparison with 40k, they are the Drukhari. Let's just say that the Daedric are considered evil for a reason. One of them is the matron of the rag, the insects, and the cannibals. The other is a spider that lives on lies, like your ex. The other created vampirism as an STD non-consensually forced on a virgin human female by him. And the other created the first musical instrument by tearing out the trachea and lungs of a living woman. These gods asked for sacrifices and tributes, but what kind of souls did the Ayleid give to these beings? Human souls, of course, and luckily for them, all of Cyrodiil was filled with humans who migrated from the north, from a little-known place called Skyrim. And just to give you an idea of how cruel the Ayleids really were, just take a listen to this in-game text. The men were given over the lifting of stones and the draining of the fields, and the upkeeps of temples and roads, or to become art tortures from strange pleasures, as in the wailing wheels of Vindassil and the god gardens of Sursen, and the flesh sculpture, which was everywhere among the slaves of the Ayleids in those days. Or worse, the realms of the Fire King of Hadul, where the beginning of drugs drawn from the admixture of daedrons into living host led one in ale new visions of torment, and the children were set aflame for nighttime tiger sport. Fed up with all of this, a slave, who would later be known as Alessia, led a slave rebellion with the help of the Nords of Skyrim, and headed by a warrior named Pelinal Whitestrake. To put it simple, Pelinal Whitestrake was an avatar of Lorkhan disguised as a human. That's the easiest way to explain it. Most of the Daedric or Adric gods have some sort of influence on Nirn. Minor influence, but influence in the end. And seeing how the Ayleids treated his legacy, Lorkhan, Shezar, or whatever you wanna call him, created a mortal avatar to balance things out. The following events can only be described as a one-man Delvenside. Alessia prayed to the divine goddess of wind, the sky, and seas. She asked for the humans of Cyrodiil to be free, and shortly after, Pelinal Whitestrake entered the server from the east, holding a sword and mace, both encrusted with the smashed viscera of elven faces, feather, and magic beads. Stuck to the redness that hung from his weapon, he lifted them, saying, "These were their eastern chieftains, no longer full of their talking." Some people saw Pelinal as a cyborg sent from the future to save the human race. Others swear that they saw him as a child, that he had white hair and a luminous card on his arm. It is said that he emerged into the world like a paromatic, that is, born by Sisyphus and all the forces of change therein. Others said that beneath the Pelinal's star armor was a chest that gaped open to show no heart, only a red rage shaped into a diamond fashion. singing like a mindless dragon. Whatever the case, upon many campaigns, including one in which, and I quote, Pellinol called out Haromir of the Copperantee into a duel at the Tor and ate his neck veins while screaming praise to Rimmon, the name of a future emperor, and then Gordhor the Shaper's head was smashed upon the goat-faced altar of Ninendava, and in his wisdom, Pellinol set a small plague spell to keep the evil from reforming by well-kent magic. The rest of the Ayleid kings understandably fled to the White Gold Tower in terror, and, in their desperation, they prayed to the Daedric Prince of Light, Meridia, to empower an elven champion to face the Star-Made Knight, Umaril the Unfeathered. Unfortunately for them, when Pellinol charged almost single-handedly against the capital, they had to conjure Daedric servants and Ayleid magic just to overwhelm him. And even then, Umaril was defeated. Umaril was laid low, the angel face of his helm dented into an ugliness which made Pellinol laugh, and his unfeathered wings broken off with sword strokes delivered while Pellinol stood frothing, insulting his ancestry and anyone else that took sheep from the old Elnofey. This angered the other Elvish kings and drove them to a madness of their own, cutting Pellinol into 8 parts while he roared in confusion. And while this may have disabled Pellinol, he was still alive. When the humans entered the capital, there were no elves alive, if they hadn't fled by that point, and Pellinol's severed head continued talking to his right hand, a winged bolt named Morihaus, swearing that Umaril was dead, but someday he would return, and they will need to eradicate his soul. But all of this I just told you is just the beginning of the Cyrodiilic Empire. At least now you know the context of one of the DLCs, Knights of the Nine. It goes about the return of Umaril the Unfeathered and a quest to recover Pellinol's armor and to exorcise his soul. After that, Alessia became the first empress of the First Cyrodiilic Empire, after 200 years of elven rule. On her deathbed, Akatosh manifested himself before her, and blessed her blood, creating in turn the Amulet of Kings. A red diamond pendant that, as long as it is worn by a dragon blood emperor, that is, someone with a high affinity with Akatosh or whoever with Alessia's blood, the Empire of Cyrodiil will prevail, and the greater influence of the Daedric princess will be limited. Many things happen between that event. In the First Era, the Second Era, the Third Era, the Empire expands until being in good terms with almost all of Tamriel. There is an Evangelion reference with a brass mecha, an emperor ascends to the ninth divine, and we reach the Third Era, like 4,000 years since the reign of Alessia. The Dragonborn emperors have kept the empire united to this day, and the main conflict of Oblivion occurs when, one day, by pure chance, a Daedric prince decides that everything was very stagnant and he needed to shake things up a bit. That's Mehrunes Dagon, the Daedric Prince of Change and Destruction. He considered that this was a perfect time to shake up the Empire of Cyrodiil. That's why he used a cultist elf named Markan Cameron to bring his physical body to Nirn, but in order to do this he needed to kill the Emperor. That way the Amulet of Kings will have no power and Mehrunes Dagon could use hell portals to manifest into Nirn. Markan also had a very weird philosophy about cycles and that his followers will go with him to another plane of Oblivion that was very peaceful. He's basically a Mormon priest, okay? That's what the main conflict in the game is about, and that's why we start by looking for an heir to the Amulet of Kings to save the Empire. The last part I want you to take into consideration revolves around one of the Daedric princes, Shiogorath. Remember what I said about Daedric princes having their own planes of oblivion and spheres of influences? Well, some Daedric princes are more powerful than others. While the sphere of influence of some deals with barters or excess and hedonism, there was a Daedric prince whose sphere of influence was order, and his name was Jigalag. Each Daedric prince had their own plane of oblivion, and these planes of oblivion were extensions of themselves. All that exist in these planes are technically part of the Daedric Prince, although manifesting physically within them it's complicated for some. The thing is that Jigalag was very powerful, and his sphere of influence surpassed that of other Daedric princes, making fractions in the realms, creating spikes of crystalline metal. Because of this, the other Daedric princes turned against Jigalag, corrupting his form into that of Shiogorath, Daedric Prince of Madness. Even though he was still very powerful, but his unstable nature keeps him in check, and that's why every time a human era ends, he changes back to his original form of Jigalag. Horrified, the Prince of Order destroys his own plane of oblivion and returns to being Shiogorath at the end of the destruction, to remake his kingdom from scratch. The thing is that the Third Era is just ending, since the Emperor was killed and all that. Therefore, Jigalag is returning. On our journeys through the Shivering Isles, the realm of Shiogorath, led us to prevent Jigalag from manifesting again, since the Amulet of Kings was no more and any Daedric princess could do whatever they wanted. So we had to look for a way to stop Jigalag, or look for someone else to act as a vessel for Shiogorath and to be the new Daedric prince of the Shivering Isles. But anyways, that's all there is for today. I really hope you liked the video, and if that's the case, remember to leave a like and subscribe if you like the video, that really helps me and the channel. Anyways, thank you all for watching and I'll see you all next time.